Hello, silent human greeting viewers. Before we dive into this incredible story, don't forget to subscribe to Silent Human Greeting and hit that notification bell so you never miss any of our videos and help our content reach more people who also love compelling stories. The Montana wilderness stretched endlessly under a gray October sky, its silence broken only by the distant hum of military vehicles. Fort Blackstone, a classified outpost nestled between towering pine trees, operated under a veil of secrecy that few civilians would ever penetrate. Emily Carter had been walking these mountains for 3 days, her hiking boots worn thin from the rocky terrain. At 26, she possessed the kind of quiet strength that came from years of independence. Working as a freelance journalist, she'd learned to navigate dangerous territories in pursuit of the truth. But today, that pursuit had led her too close to something she wasn't supposed to see. The sound of helicopters echoed through the valley as she crouched behind a fallen log, her camera still warm in her hands. She'd captured images of unmarked vehicles, soldiers in non-standard uniforms, and equipment that didn't match any official military inventory she knew of. Her investigative instincts told her this was the story that could make her career, but her survival instincts were screaming something else entirely. "There she is!" The shout came from behind her, followed by the crashing of boots through underbrush. Emily ran, her heart pounding as branches whipped against her face. The pine needles beneath her feet were slippery from recent rain, and she stumbled more than once as she tried to navigate the steep slope. Behind her, the voices grew closer, at least 6 men, maybe more. "Cut her off at the ravine," someone barked. "Don't let her reach the main road." She veered left, hoping to lose them in the dense forest, but her foot caught on a root and she tumbled hard, her camera flying from her grip and shattering against a rock. Pain shot through her ankle, and she knew immediately that her chances of outrunning trained soldiers had just dropped to 0. They surrounded her within minutes. 6 men in tactical gear, their faces hidden behind dark goggles and balaclavas. Their weapons weren't standard military issue, and their patches showed no recognizable unit insignia. Emily Carter, age 26, freelance journalist from Seattle. The lead soldier read from a tablet. "You've been observed conducting unauthorized surveillance of a classified military installation." "I'm a journalist on public land," Emily said, struggling to her feet despite the throbbing in her ankle. "I have every right to—" "You have no rights here," the soldier interrupted. "You're coming with us." They zip-tied her hands behind her back and led her through the forest toward the outpost. Emily's mind raced, trying to process what was happening. This wasn't how things were supposed to work in America. Journalists didn't just disappear for doing their jobs. But as they approached the imposing gates of Fort Blackstone, she realized she might have stumbled into something far more dangerous than a simple story. The outpost was larger than she'd realized from her distant vantage point. Concrete buildings rose from the forest floor like gray monuments, connected by paved walkways and surrounded by multiple layers of fencing topped with razor wire. Soldiers moved with purpose between the structures, but something about their demeanor struck Emily as different from regular military personnel. There was a coldness, a detachment that made her skin crawl. They brought her to a holding cell in what appeared to be an administrative building. The room was sterile and windowless, containing only a metal bench and a single harsh fluorescent light. As the door slammed shut, Emily finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of fear that had been building since her capture. Hours passed. She had no way to track time, but her ankle had swollen considerably, and the throbbing had settled into a constant ache. When the door finally opened again, a different soldier entered, older, with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice carrying a slight southern accent. "I'm Colonel Richard Hayes, commanding officer of this facility. I think it's time you and I had a conversation about what you think you saw out there." Colonel Hayes was a man in his early 50s, with graying temples and eyes that seemed to catalog everything they observed. He wore standard military fatigues, but Emily noticed his insignia didn't match any branch of service she recognized. "I'm a journalist," Emily said, keeping her voice steady despite her fear. "I have a right to legal representation, and people know where I am. If I don't check in, nobody knows where you are," Hayes interrupted, settling into a chair across from her. "Your last known location was a coffee shop in Missoula 2 days ago. As far as the outside world is concerned, Emily Carter is somewhere in the Montana wilderness, probably lost or injured. These things happen to solo hikers all the time." The casual way he spoke about her disappearance sent a chill down Emily's spine. This wasn't an arrest, it was an abduction. "What do you want from me?" she asked. Hayes leaned forward. "I want to know who sent you. I want to know what information you've already transmitted, and I want to know how much you've figured out about our operation here." "Nobody sent me. I'm working on a story about land use disputes between the federal government and local communities. I saw your facility and you photographed classified equipment," Hayes cut her off. You documented personnel and vehicle movements. That's not journalism, Miss Carter. That's espionage. Emily's blood ran cold. Espionage was a federal crime that could mean decades in prison, if she was lucky enough to see the inside of a courtroom. I didn't know it was classified, she said. There were no signs, no warnings. Your ignorance of the law is not my concern, Hayes replied. What concerns me is that you've seen things that could compromise national security. That makes you a threat, and I deal with threats very directly. He stood up, straightening his uniform jacket. You have until tomorrow morning to decide how cooperative you're going to be, because if you choose to be difficult, I'll have to demonstrate to my men what happens to enemies of the state. And trust me, Miss Carter, they need that demonstration more than you might think. As Hayes left the cell, Emily heard him speaking to someone in the corridor. Prepare the courtyard for tomorrow. Make sure all personnel are present. It's time they remembered why discipline matters. The door slammed shut, and Emily was alone again with her fear and the growing certainty that she had walked into something far more dangerous than she'd ever imagined. The night in the cell passed without sleep. Emily's ankle throbbed. Her wrists were raw from the zip ties, and every sound in the corridor made her heart race. She'd tried to convince herself that this was still America, that there were laws and procedures that would protect her, but Hayes's words echoed in her mind. Enemies of the state. When dawn finally came, she could see thin strips of gray light seeping under the cell door. The sounds of the outpost waking up filtered through the walls, boots on concrete, vehicle engines starting, the distant hum of machinery, normal sounds that felt anything but normal in her current situation. The door opened, and two soldiers entered. They were different from the ones who had captured her, younger with the kind of eager brutality that came from wanting to prove themselves to their superiors. Time to go, spy, one of them said, cutting her zip ties only to immediately restrain her hands with metal shackles. They led her through corridors she hadn't seen before, past rooms filled with equipment she couldn't identify and maps marked with locations that weren't on any public charts. The outpost was clearly much larger than it appeared from the outside, with underground levels and hidden passages that spoke of serious funding and serious secrecy. They emerged into bright sunlight that made Emily squint after hours in the windowless cell. The courtyard was surrounded by concrete buildings on three sides, with the fourth side opening to a view of the Montana mountains. Under different circumstances, it might have been beautiful, but Emily's attention was immediately drawn to the crowd of soldiers assembled in formation around the edges of the courtyard. At least 50 men, all in the same non-standard uniforms, all watching her with expressions that ranged from curiosity to outright hostility. Colonel Hayes stood on a raised platform at the far end of the courtyard, his hands clasped behind his back. When he saw Emily, he nodded to the soldiers escorting her. "Bring her to the center," he commanded, his voice carrying clearly in the crisp mountain air. They marched her to the middle of the courtyard, where a single metal chair sat waiting. The symbolism wasn't lost on her. She was being displayed like a trophy or a warning. "Gentlemen," Hayes began, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone accustomed to addressing troops, "what you see before you is a perfect example of the enemy we face in our modern world. Not soldiers in uniform, not foreign agents with diplomatic immunity, but civilians who think they can spy on our operations with impunity." Emily tried to stand straighter, to project confidence she didn't feel. Around her, the assembled soldiers watched with the kind of focused attention that suggested this wasn't a routine briefing. "Miss Carter here claims to be a journalist," Hayes continued. "She says she was just doing her job when she photographed our equipment and documented our personnel. She wants us to believe that her presence here was innocent curiosity." Some of the soldiers laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the concrete walls. "But we know better, don't we?" Hayes asked. "We know that the enemies of this country come in many forms. Sometimes they wear the uniform of foreign militaries, and sometimes they hide behind press credentials and claims of constitutional rights." Emily's heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. She'd covered conflicts in other countries, had seen what happened when military forces decided civilians were enemies, but she'd never imagined facing that situation in her own homeland. "The question before us now," Hayes said, stepping down from the platform and walking toward her, "is how we demonstrate the consequences of crossing us, how we make sure that anyone else who might be watching understands what happens to spies." He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath and see the cold calculation in his eyes. "Strip her," he said. The words hit Emily like a physical blow. Around the courtyard, the soldiers stirred with anticipation, and she realized that this had been planned, that Hayes had specifically assembled this audience for maximum humiliation. "You can't do this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is America. There are laws. Not here there aren't." Hayes replied. Here, I am the law. The soldiers who had brought her to the courtyard stepped forward. Emily tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go. Hands grabbed her arms, holding her still as other hands began tugging at her clothing. Please, she said, louder now, desperation creeping into her voice. You don't have to do this. I'll tell you whatever you want to know. But Hayes just watched with the same cold expression as his men stripped away her jacket, then her shirt. The mountain air was cold against her skin, and she could feel the eyes of 50 soldiers taking in her humiliation. They removed her boots and socks, her jeans, leaving her in only her underwear as she shivered in the center of the courtyard. Some of the soldiers were laughing now, making crude comments that added psychological torture to the physical degradation. You see, Miss Carter, Hayes said conversationally, as if they were discussing the weather instead of her systematic dehumanization. Power isn't just about having weapons or authority. It's about breaking people's spirits, showing them that all their assumptions about rights and dignity are just illusions we allow them to maintain. Emily closed her eyes, trying to find some inner strength to hold on to as hands reached for her bra. She thought about the stories she'd covered, about people who had survived worse than this and found ways to rebuild their lives. She thought about her parents, who had raised her to stand up for truth and justice. She thought about, what the hell is that? The voice came from one of the soldiers behind her, sharp with surprise. Emily opened her eyes and saw that Hayes had gone completely still, his face draining of color, as he stared at something over her shoulder. The hands that had been removing her clothing stopped moving. The laughter died away, replaced by a silence so complete that Emily could hear her own heart beating. Hayes walked slowly around behind her, and Emily felt his presence like ice water down her spine. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. Where did you get that mark? Emily didn't understand the question at first. Mark? What mark? But then she remembered the tattoo she'd gotten 5 years ago, during a brief period of rebellion after her father's death. A small symbol at the base of her spine, barely larger than a silver dollar. She'd almost forgotten about it herself, hidden as it was beneath her clothing. I said, where did you get that mark? Hayes' voice was louder now, with an edge of something that might have been fear. It's just a tattoo, Emily said, confused by the sudden change in atmosphere. I got it in Seattle after my father died. It's a symbol he used to draw when I was little. I wanted something to remember him by, but as she spoke, she realized that wasn't entirely true. Her father had drawn the symbol, yes, but she'd never known what it meant. When she'd shown the design to the tattoo artist, he'd seemed surprised, even reluctant to ink it. He'd asked her several times if she was sure, if she understood what she was asking for. Hayes came back around to face her, and Emily was shocked to see that his hands were shaking. What did your father do for a living? He asked. He was a professor, Emily replied. Medieval history at the University of Washington. He specialized in secret societies and ancient orders. The silence in the courtyard stretched on, broken only by the distant sound of wind through the pine trees. Emily looked around at the assembled soldiers and saw her own confusion reflected in their faces. Something had changed, but she didn't understand what. Hayes stepped closer, his eyes never leaving her face. What was your father's name? He asked. Professor James Carter, Emily said. He died 5 years ago. Cancer. Hayes closed his eyes for a long moment, and when he opened them again, Emily saw something she hadn't expected. Respect. James Carter, he repeated softly. The Keeper of the Northern Gate. The title meant nothing to Emily, but its effect on Colonel Hayes was immediate and profound. He stepped back as if she'd struck him, his face pale beneath his military tan. Around the courtyard, the assembled soldiers shifted uncomfortably, sensing their commander's sudden uncertainty, but not understanding its cause. Cover her up, Hayes said sharply to the soldiers nearest Emily. Now! Someone threw a jacket around her shoulders and Emily pulled it tight, grateful for both the warmth and the return of some dignity. But her mind was racing, trying to understand what had just happened. What did you call my father? She asked. Hayes didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned to address the assembled soldiers, his voice carrying the authority of command, but lacking the confident brutality it had held moments before. Dismissed, he barked. Return to your regular duties, and not a word of what you've seen here to anyone. That's an order. The soldiers began to disperse, casting curious glances back at Emily as they filed out of the courtyard. Within minutes, only Hayes and 2 guards remained. Take her to Conference Room Alpha, Hayes instructed the guards, and bring her some proper clothes. As they led her back into the building, Emily's mind churned with questions. Her father had been a university professor, specializing in medieval history and secret societies. He'd been brilliant, respected respected in his field, but hardly the type of man to inspire fear in a military commander. What could Hayes possibly know about James Carter that she didn't? Conference Room Alpha turned out to be a comfortable space with a long wooden table, cushioned chairs, and windows that actually showed the outside world. It was such a contrast to the sterile cell where she'd spent the night that Emily almost felt like she was in a different facility entirely. A female soldier brought her civilian clothes, jeans, a sweater, and sneakers that were surprisingly close to her size. As Emily changed, grateful to be fully clothed again, she tried to piece together the few clues she had. Her father had indeed specialized in secret societies, but his work had been purely academic. He'd written papers on the Knights Templar, the Rosicrucians, various medieval orders that had claimed mystical knowledge. Emily had always assumed it was just historical research, dry scholarly work about organizations that had been dead for centuries, but the way Hayes had reacted to her tattoo suggested something very different. When Hayes entered the conference room 20 minutes later, he'd changed out of his military fatigues into civilian clothes, khakis, and a button-down shirt that made him look more like a college professor than a military commander. The transformation was jarring. "Miss Carter," he said, settling into a chair across from her, "I owe you an apology for what happened in the courtyard. If I had known who you were—" "Who am I?" Emily interrupted. "Because apparently I don't know myself." Hayes studied her face for a long moment. "You're the daughter of James Carter, one of the most important men I never met." He leaned back in his chair, suddenly looking older than his 50-odd years. "Tell me about your father's work," he said. "What did you know about his research?" Emily shrugged. "He studied medieval history, secret societies, ancient orders, that kind of thing. He had a home office full of old books and manuscripts. Sometimes he'd travel to Europe for research, visiting libraries and museums. It seemed pretty boring to me when I was growing up." "Did he ever talk to you about his work? About specific organizations he was studying?" "Not really," Emily said. "He always said his work was too complex for casual conversation, that people wouldn't understand the significance without years of background study. The only time I really paid attention was when he was designing that symbol, the one I had tattooed. He spent weeks perfecting it, drawing it over and over until he got it exactly right." Hayes nodded slowly. "The mark of the keeper. I'm not surprised he took such care with it." "You keep talking about my father like he was some kind of secret agent," Emily said, frustration creeping into her voice. "He was a professor. He graded papers and gave lectures about medieval history." "He wasn't James Bond," Hayes smiled grimly. "No, he wasn't. He was something much more important." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Montana wilderness. "Miss Carter, what I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels of government. There are perhaps 50 people in the entire world who know the full truth, and most of them are dead." Emily felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "Your father," Hayes continued, "was part of an organization that has existed in various forms for over 1,000 years. Not the medieval orders he studied publicly, but something older and more secretive. They call themselves the Watchers, and their purpose is to safeguard knowledge that could be catastrophic if it fell into the wrong hands." "That's insane," Emily said. "You're talking about conspiracy theories, and I'm talking about mathematical formulas that could destabilize the global economy overnight," Hayes interrupted. "Biological research that could create plagues that would make COVID look like a common cold. Psychological techniques that could turn entire populations into slaves. The kind of knowledge that governments would kill for, and that certain individuals would die to protect." He turned back to face her. "Your father was one of those individuals. The keepers are chosen for their intelligence, their integrity, and their willingness to sacrifice everything to keep humanity's most dangerous secrets buried." Emily stared at him, trying to process what she was hearing. It sounded like the plot of a thriller novel, not the life story of the quiet man who had taught her to ride a bicycle and helped her with her homework. "If any of this is true," she said slowly, "why are you telling me? And what does it have to do with this place?" Hayes returned to his seat, his expression grave. "Because 3 months ago, someone broke into your father's office at the university. They didn't take anything obvious, computers, files, research materials, but they did something much more subtle. They photographed specific documents that your father should have destroyed years ago." Emily's blood ran cold. "What kind of documents?" "Location markers," Hayes said. "Your father was responsible for a network of hidden sites across North America, places where the most dangerous knowledge is stored. The mark on your spine isn't just a tattoo, Miss Carter. It's a key, a genetic genetic and symbolic identifier that grants access to those sites. The room seemed to spin around Emily as the implications hit her. "You think I'm here to steal whatever you're hiding?" she said. Hayes shook his head. "I thought you were a spy sent by whoever broke into your father's office, someone who had discovered the location of this facility and was using his daughter as the perfect cover identity. But now you know I'm not. Now I know you're something much more dangerous," Hayes said. "You're a keeper who doesn't know she's a keeper, and there are people out there who would do anything to get their hands on you." The weight of Hayes's revelation settled over Emily like a physical burden. She sat in the conference room, staring at her hands as she tried to reconcile the father she remembered with the figure Hayes was describing. "I need proof," she said finally. "If my father was really involved in this organization, there would be evidence, letters, documents, something." Hayes nodded, as if he'd been expecting this request. "There is. Your father left specific instructions in case something happened to him, in case you ever needed to know the truth." He pressed a button on the conference table, and moments later one of the guards entered carrying a metal briefcase. "This was delivered to us 6 months after your father's death," Hayes explained, inputting a complex code into the briefcase's lock. It was sealed with instructions that it only be opened in the presence of Emily Carter, and only if she bore the mark of the keeper. The briefcase opened with a soft click, revealing a collection of documents, photographs, and what appeared to be a small recording device. Emily recognized her father's handwriting immediately, the precise, careful script he'd used for all his academic work. "He made this recording shortly before his diagnosis," Hayes said, activating the device. "Perhaps you should hear it in his own words." Her father's voice filled the room, and Emily felt tears spring to her eyes. It had been 5 years since she'd heard that familiar baritone, with its slight academic accent and careful pronunciation. "Emily, my dear daughter, if you're hearing this, it means I'm gone, and you've discovered the truth about my work. I had hoped to spare you this burden, to let you live a normal life without the weight of the world's secrets on your shoulders, but circumstances have apparently made that impossible." Emily closed her eyes, letting the sound of his voice wash over her. "The organization I serve, that you may now be called to serve, exists because humanity has a tendency to discover knowledge faster than it develops wisdom. Throughout history, brilliant minds have uncovered truths that could destroy civilization if they were widely known. Mathematical proofs that could collapse economic systems, biological insights that could create unstoppable plagues, psychological techniques that could enslave entire populations." Hayes watched Emily's face as the recording continued. "The Watchers were formed in the 11th century, during a time when such knowledge was beginning to proliferate. We are not a secret society in the popular sense. We don't seek power or control. We are librarians, Emily, guardians of humanity's most dangerous discoveries. We preserve this knowledge in case it's ever needed for humanity's survival, but we keep it hidden from those who would use it for destructive purposes." Emily opened her eyes and looked at Hayes. "The facility here, it's one of these hiding places?" He nodded. "One of 7 in North America. Each contains knowledge that could reshape the world for better or worse." Her father's voice continued from the recording. "The mark you bear is not just a symbol of remembrance, though I'm glad you chose to honor our relationship in that way. It is a key, both genetic and mystical, that identifies you as my successor. The knowledge of your bloodline, combined with the proper symbolic recognition, grants access to the hidden vaults." Emily touched her spine instinctively, feeling the slight raised edges of the tattoo through her sweater. "If you're hearing this, it means the Watchers believe you're needed. Someone has threatened the security of our network, and you may be the only person who can help preserve what we've protected for so many centuries." The recording paused, and Emily could hear her father taking a deep breath before continuing. "I know this is overwhelming, my dear. I know you never asked for this responsibility, but I also know you have the strength and the integrity to bear it. You are my daughter in every way that matters, and I trust you to make the right choice." The recording ended, leaving the conference room in silence. Emily sat motionless, processing everything she'd heard. "The choice," she said finally. "What choice?" Hayes leaned forward. 3 days ago, we intercepted communications indicating that someone is planning to breach multiple keeper sites simultaneously. They have inside knowledge, probably obtained from your father's stolen documents. If they succeed, they'll have access to knowledge that could destabilize global civilization. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you need from me?" "Your genetic marker can lock down the entire network," Hayes explained, "but it requires you to visit each site personally to authenticate your identity and authorize the security protocols. It's dangerous work, and once you begin, there will be people who will stop at nothing to capture or kill you." Emily stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the mountains where this strange journey had begun. 24 hours ago, she'd been a freelance journalist, chasing what she thought was a simple story about government land use. Now she was being asked to become a guardian of humanity's most dangerous secrets. "If I say no," she asked, "then we do our best to protect the sites with conventional security," Hayes replied. "But conventional security won't be enough against people who know exactly what they're looking for and how to find it." Emily thought about her father, about the quiet man who had apparently carried the weight of the world's secrets while still finding time to help her with her homework and teach her to drive. She thought about the life she'd built as a journalist, the stories she'd told, the truth she'd tried to bring to light. "If I say yes, what happens to my life? My career?" Hayes's expression softened. "The Watchers aren't monks, Miss Carter. Your father continued his academic career, published papers, lived what appeared to be a normal life. But he also accepted a responsibility that few people could handle, and he fulfilled it with honor." Emily turned back to face him. "Show me." "Show you what?" "Whatever you're protecting here. If I'm going to make this choice, I need to understand what's at stake." Hayes considered this for a moment, then nodded. "Very well, but understand that once you see it, there's no going back. You'll know too much to simply return to your old life." He led her from the conference room through a series of corridors and down multiple flights of stairs. The facility was even larger than Emily had realized, with entire levels built deep into the mountain. The architecture became more sophisticated as they descended, with smooth concrete walls giving way to polished stone and high-tech security systems. They finally stopped at a vault door that looked like something from a bank, all steel and electronic locks. Hayes pressed his palm to a scanner, submitted to a retinal scan, and spoke his name and authorization code into a voice recognition system. "Now you," he said to Emily. She pressed her palm to the scanner, wondering what would happen. To her surprise, the system immediately recognized her, displaying her name and genetic profile on a small screen. "It knows me already?" she asked. "Your father registered your genetic markers when you were born," Hayes explained, "just in case." The vault door opened with a soft hiss, revealing a circular chamber lined with climate-controlled storage units. But Emily's attention was immediately drawn to the center of the room, where a single pedestal held what appeared to be a simple leather journal. "The Blackstone Archive," Hayes said reverently. "Mathematical proofs that could predict and manipulate stock market crashes with perfect accuracy. If this knowledge were made public, the global economy would collapse within days." Emily stared at the innocent-looking journal. "All that in one book?" "The math is elegantly simple once you understand the underlying principles," Hayes said. "That's what makes it so dangerous. A motivated individual could memorize these formulas and become the most powerful person on Earth within a matter of months." Emily felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. This wasn't just about her anymore, or even about honoring her father's memory. Millions of people could suffer if this knowledge fell into the wrong hands. "How many sites are there?" she asked. 7 in North America, 12 worldwide. Each contains different types of dangerous knowledge: biological, psychological, technological, mathematical. Your father was responsible for all of them. Emily looked around the vault, imagining similar chambers hidden across the continent, each holding secrets that could reshape or destroy civilization. "If I do this," she said slowly, "I'll need help. I can't secure 7 sites alone." Hayes nodded. "There are others. The Watchers still exist, though we're fewer in number than in your father's time. We can provide support, resources, protection." Emily thought about her life in Seattle, her small apartment and her freelance career. She thought about the stories she'd planned to write, the normal life she'd thought she wanted. Then she thought about her father, quietly carrying impossible burdens while still managing to be the kind of parent who made her feel safe and loved. "All right," she said, turning to face Hayes with new determination in her voice. "Tell me what I need to do." Hello, silent human greeting viewers. Thank you for following Emily's incredible journey with us. Don't forget to subscribe to Silent Human Greeting and hit that notification bell to stay updated on all our compelling stories and help us bring these amazing tales to even more viewers who love dramatic storytelling. The end.